Oh, recording in progress. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Sandi.
Ever after.
Are we talking about Cinderella?
Well, does it make you think of a fairy tale?
Yes.
What do you think of fairy tales?
I think that they are. I think that they are silly to take on a superficial level. I think they end typically on a good note, which is never how life ends. And I think that they've been changed by Disney.
Hmm.
But really, they're just meant to scare kids to being
Um,
good, obedient adults.
what do you think the difference is between fairy tale, allegory, and legend? Or the differences are, rather.
I think fairy tale implicitly is for children.
Okay,
I think legend is what happens when a story's been told so much that people forget where it came from.
right.
Um, I think allegory is all of the Bible. Um, but, I don't know. Somehow the intention is different with each of them. I think that there was a time when humans, I mean, they still do today, of course, but there's definitely a time when humans tried to distill ideas down to simple stories to make them more memorable. Um, and I think sometimes when enough time has passed, we forget that that's all that they were, was a distilled version of a better, bigger idea.
Funnily enough, I was actually speaking to A level about this. And
And they said
also,
much better things than you just did.
no, actually, the thing I was asking them about particularly was to do with our exam title this year for A level, which is simple and or complex. And we were talking more particularly about something and nothing, and the kind of relationship between those things, whether they are opposites or whether they are exclusive to each other or whatever it might mean. And uh, yeah, just kind of asking if there's like a relationship between uh, a story or a thing and the representation of a story or a thing, and how we receive these kind of truths, like we're handed down truths, how we kind of pick them apart and take them forward in a new context. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with that. I'll come back to that in a minute. I want to get on with showing you Rubens' painting. I know you don't particularly like the Baroque.
I,
Um,
I was half joking.
okay. But anyway, this is um, one of Rubens' best known paintings for anyone who's ever been to the Dulwich Picture Gallery. It's one of the paintings in their collection. Um, it is Venus, Mars, and Cupid.
Walk into a bar.
Rubens makes things makes makes things physical out of things that are abstract.
You mean takes ideas and anthropomorphizes them?
Yeah, I mean, we take huge or grand notions and we turn them into images.
Yep.
And Rubens is masterful at that. I mean, we're looking at Venus, who, in some accounts, had an adulterous union with Mars, the god of war, and gave birth to Cupid. So, Venus, all the things we might think of and know about Venus, beauty, um, the feminine.
Sure.
There's a
The feminine up to and including procreation. Like I just mean, the feminine as in the desirous part or as in the actual birthing part. You know what I'm saying? I tend to think of Venus in a much more superficial way.
You mean less
Of
visceral than actually giving birth?
yes, like
Right.
all the stuff up to that. You know what I mean? Saying from the point of view of like the desirousness of her.
Well, I mean, here she is. This is, Cupid is her
Sure, I get
offspring.
it. Yeah, there's
Anyway,
no
I
way
mean,
that kid's hanging on.
it's Cupid. Cupid does whatever Cupid wants.
Yeah.
Cupid
Okay.
fires that
Anyway,
arrow at anyone.
he's still got a lot of practice to go. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so we're talking about Ever After. Maybe that title pertains to the sense of like the fairy tale or allegory, certainly of myth. And here we have this family portrait that actually would have been very kind of poignant in 1635. I mean, Rubens, at the height of this 30 Years' War, was very aware that war was all around, death was everywhere. And in this painting, it's a very large painting, we come face to face with enormous tenderness. And we see that war is turned by love, Venus. And looking at their faces is a triangle of something that is actually in itself rather beautiful. Could be even ordinary, actually. A father looking at a child, looking at a mother, looking at someone with tenderness, care, compassion, love. Those are not things we associate with Mars or with war.
Well, there's also a certain maturity to it all. The idea that when I was a younger man, I was there fighting, and now I realize that I'm in the next stage of life kind of idea.
Hmm. Anyway, she's holding her breast. Cupid is clinging on. Couldn't possibly be holding on there. The shield down on the ground there is
Mhm.
like a strange vortex or a portal or something that might suck him in to some evil, maybe. But the kind of benevolence and again beauty of the mother seems to
Oh,
keep
Mars
him.
is in shadow and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in so many ways it's the kind of painting that gets a big gasp in one way. But in another way, we become quite complacent about paintings such as this. It's like 10 a penny at the National Gallery.
Sure.
At Dulwich, there are other paintings that are similar and they have other work by Rubens. Um, but the other reason why I titled it Ever After is because our other artist this evening is Anthony Daley, who has an exhibition at Dulwich at the moment, and it's called Son of Rubens. Now, uncharacteristically for us on our show, I have shown a picture of what the paintings Daley has made in context of Son of Rubens, what they look like in the gallery space. There are 12 paintings and they're big. They're similarly sized, in fact, probably a bit bigger, each of them, to the original Rubens painting. And it is that Rubens painting of Venus, Mars, and Cupid that has so inspired him. Although Rubens' work more broadly, I think, has influenced him. So Daley, Anthony Daley, is a living British artist. He lives and works in London. He's exhibited internationally, but this exhibition at Dulwich really showcases his particular kind of abstract painting, abstraction, abstract expressionism, as he calls himself, abstract expressionist. Mm,
His work to me feels like, abstract expressionist put through a Renoir filter.
mm. Well, there's lots of stuff in the press about it, and especially in the London press, There were loads of comments like, you know, this is Rubens seen through a Jamaican lens, for example. Daley grew up in Jamaica. He came to the UK when he was still a boy, but he did know about Rubens already. Apparently there were books on Rubens, I think, at his church when he was still in Jamaica, and he would pore over them. There's lots of kind of connected resources from Dulwich, which is very well resourced if you want to find out more about this exhibition, and also generally about Daley and of course Rubens. But the thing I find so fascinating is that one would, as an artist, meditate and reflect on one's inspiration so keenly. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum. All artists are influenced by someone else, something else,
right.
and the synthesis of that comes out in their work. But here Daley is as a son of Rubens, almost like an owing to a great master. And Daley's been at great pains in the past to explain that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, don't we, when we approach our own greatness even.
Do you think he's naming that because he sees himself as the son of Rubens, or is that his work is the offspring of Rubens' work? Like, how do you think he sees it?
I'm not sure this is an homage to Rubens as such. What I think instead is that we have a painter who has always striven to be as good as a great master.
Right.
And to call the exhibition Son of Rubens is to acknowledge that one is in the hallowed space with other great painters. Now that might come across as something of arrogance. I don't think it is at all. I think it's a genuine acknowledgement of the power of other people's work to impactfully and importantly, significantly change the course of our lives, make us into better painters. He doesn't like being called an artist. He prefers to be called a painter.
I like that. Yeah,
I do. But I mean, going back to the painting that has so kind of piqued his interest, to generate these other huge paintings surrounding the kind of ideas, ideals, and also colors, textures, and so on that we find in Rubens' painting, I do wonder about them. Just in terms
would you see a connection if it wasn't labeled as such?
No, not necessarily. I would find other connections, however, and I think this is interesting as any kind of student of art, you know, to make assumptions might give us the so-called wrong answer because factually it might not be correct, but there's no harm at all in assuming things about where art comes from.
Right.
In that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily see this or this as a detail on a wall and think of Rubens, but I might think of other things, and I still hope for that when I meet something. Yes, I want to engage with the thing in and of itself. And I think
when you say you think of other things, you mean your mind associates other art?
Often, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's just that's almost like a respectfulness, isn't it, to the journey an artist may have taken to reach that point. I might not get it completely right. I have to read the blurbs like everybody else. The references themselves aren't overt, but what has happened, it seems, is that we have an artist who's not afraid to lay bare the deep significance of other people's work in his own mind, sort of like as a psychological, not support, but a psychological imperative.
Do you think in general, artists, even if they have inspirations or they have, sorry, I dropped my headphone. Even if they have inspirations or they have work that they drew from, are weary of admitting that because there is some despite the fact that we all know that nothing comes from a vacuum, like you said, there is this desire for originality in the art world, and that by admitting somehow you are an amalgamation of what came before, you're setting yourself up to be lesser than right off the bat. I'm putting it poorly, but do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
I do, but I also, I mean, I used the word already, arrogance. You know, there might be an assumption made by someone, not me, that someone like Daley is in
You're
fact,
putting yourself in line with Picasso and whoever
yeah,
else. Like, who do you think you are?
actually, I see that as something that is full of humility. And rather, I see the arrogance lying in somebody who does expect to be believed as entirely original.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of artists maybe really struggle with this. I certainly know student artists struggle with this, much as we, certainly where I work, might teach from sources. So, you know, we're talking about, here is a source, let's learn from it. And then maybe later we synthesize sources, plural, to generate something that's authentically yours. You know, the kind of blending of ideas and the picking out of certain aspects of other people's art to combine into this cake
I think
of amazingness. That's actually a very useful tool when learning about how to make art. To kind of deny that art comes from somewhere and it's just suddenly magicked out of nothing is that to me seems
it's folly.
like a conceit.
I mean, I think mimicry in art is step one, you know. I mean, I still often myself will see somebody else's work and think, oh, how did they do that? Let me figure that out. Even if that's not going to be the kind of work that I do. I think that sometimes I think that there are people, especially in art, who want to get high-minded, highbrow, want to talk about abstractions, when the reality with a lot of art, there's a real that we just, it just sometimes distracts from the reality of sometimes inspiration is of craft more than art. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That somebody may look at Rubens' paintings, for example, and say, how did he get that those reflections on that shield to look the way they did? Now, in a conversation with somebody who's not a painter, they may see, oh, I worked, you know, I was looking at the way he generates shadows was fascinating to me. But to another painter, he'd be like, man, how the hell did he do the white on black like that to make that reflection look like? I tried it with a knife, that didn't work. It is wrong to discount the idea that, I don't know, I never had a problem with the idea of, I think a lot of art is figuring things out. And I think that includes looking at people who came before you and finding some way for all of that to feed into what you end up making.
Well, I mean, in Rubens' case, we know that he was absolutely, and especially in his later career, heavily influenced by Titian.
Sure.
His trip to Italy, and especially his time in Venice, for example, hugely influential in his practice as a painter.
Well, in some ways, I mean, I would argue that the people who came before Rubens were like the best of the best. That's sort of like one of my favorite eras of art. So, you know, sort of like you're making music in the 70s. Well, you came after the Beatles. So like, you know, look,
I mean, do we give fair due or credit to the things always that come before? You know, if you go to any exhibition, you go to a lot of exhibitions, as do I, wander around and you look at painting, especially new painting, contemporary painting, ultra contemporary painting.
Sure.
You know, are we graciously being allowed in on the secrets of where it comes from?
Do you think that there should be an inspirations list at the beginning of every catalog?
No, and I don't think that's what I'm saying either. Maybe I am. I'm kind of really looking at this now. There's part of me that does bristle against that, because it seems quite closed, doesn't it? Because it seems then that if you name your sources, so to speak, that you might be closing the other wider sense of inspiration that has brought you to this point of creation, creativity.
See, it's funny. I would go the other way and say, by listing your sources, then art just becomes a bibliography. And then, like, where are we? You know what I mean? That takes the magic out of it.
That's what I'm saying too. So
Okay,
I'm
okay.
kind of bristling against that a little bit. But at the same time, I think that it's false to assume that things we see and that we so admire on the walls of galleries all over the world have come from nothing.
Sure.
They've always come from something.
Sure.
They've always come from something. I mean, Daley, again, thinking about an acknowledgement of reference, of influence. This could be about the kind of painterliness, the coalescing of color, the particular hues. And although the colors, again, you can see it maybe better here, you know, are they Rubin-esque colors? Well, no, not necessarily.
No.
But that doesn't mean that those colors don't have a validity in the stable of colors that have been influenced by Rubens' painting.
The interesting thing is, though, that is, if I looked at these, I would think more Turner than Rubens. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there, it's interesting that, and they're certainly very modern looking colors too.
I mean, they kind of remind me of like Chris O'Feely has done, you know, the watercolor series that led to Tapestry, and I wondered if that was rather oversimplifying something that, as somebody else described in a blog post or Brixton Times or something, you know, as a kind of Jamaican lens on Rubens.
Sure.
Or a kind of
it feels like that's derogatory.
Yes, it could
when they say
be.
that.
Yeah, it could be. So,
oh, look at this black outsider coming in and trying to tell us like some representation of European art. I mean, I'm not saying agreeing with that. I'm just saying I wonder if that's how some people are playing that.
Daley is very well established. I mean, he has good connections. I mean, Flowers Gallery in London, for example.
Look at that space. That is amazing.
Yes. I mean,
I love that.
I'm definitely paraphrasing this now, but you know, it is a kind of almost a bit of a stereotype to find an artist studio like this. You know, is this not exactly
That's what you want an artist studio to look like? Yeah.
Exactly. Is this not exactly how one would hope an artist lives? And actually, apparently, there's a bit of a crisis for him in that, you know, he's reached a point where he's having to kind of get rid of things from this studio space, and that in itself is kind of full of pathos. I don't think you get to be a painter of this caliber unless there is deep scrutiny, both of others, but also of oneself.
Well, that's true of all artists, and I think that's true of all people who are actually looking at themselves in their lives.
But do we know enough people who are doing this, Bill?
I don't know. I do. I do it all the time.
Deep scrutiny of themselves, myself. What is this? In Daley's case, it seems to me that he is going through this meditation on beauty and the sublime, sparked by Rubens, for example, and sparked.
It's interesting though that he beauty and sublimity, but look at the space that he's in. You know what I mean? It's chaos. That there's distillation of or tunnel vision of, he's trying to create beauty in a very specific direction, you know? Cool looking guy too.
Yeah, I'm just going to read what Daley said about the painting that we started with, the Rubens painting. It says, or he said, I became attached to that painting and challenged by it on many levels. politically, psychologically, technically. I was making abstract expressionist pictures by then in the 1980s, but seeking to maintain qualities of the old masters. That painting spoke to me and said, stop painting figuratively. I aggressively went more abstract because of that painting.
He rebelled against it. So the influence in some ways was to do the opposite of it. We always assume an influence is a positive one.
Well, that it's, become something through Daley's hand in charge that is not figurative.
Right.
Does it deny the figurative? Again, this is like looking at a painting and spotting sources. Are you looking at these paintings and spotting figures?
Yes, but even the figures are vague, right?
Right. Reaction to something is still an enormous compliment to that thing, isn't it?
Sure. Whether it's towards or away from.
Anyway, a painting such as this, I think, still quite, well.
Which would you rather look
relevant. Well, Daley's work to me is extraordinarily beautiful. I covet.
You like the colors. You like the riotous nature of it.
Well, I mean, I'd need to wear my sunglasses if I had it at home, but to me, Daley's work is everything that I want from a painting. I would be mesmerized. I am mesmerized by Daley's painting. I'm drawn to this, and I want to look at it, but in a quite an academic way, I suppose. In that it doesn't reach into my soul. Now, that's a very nuanced thing. It's a very particular thing to each viewer. I understand this painting and its grand place in art history and at Dulwich. By the way, just a point of information, Dulwich, which was founded in 1811, was actually the first public art gallery purpose-built in the whole world.
I don't think I knew that. Also interesting, there's a private road through there that you actually have to pay a toll road through the town. Right by Dulwich Park.
What a lovely place.
Yeah, next time, at some point, a potential topic for us in the future, because I'm going to the Gardner Museum in a couple weeks up in Boston. We bought tickets and then it got me digging into Isabella Stewart Gardner's life. And the amount of props that we give rich people who buy art is really interesting. It's like she was basically given $100 million from her parents, and her husband was from a rich family too. And so she went around and she bought art. And so everyone's like, oh my God, what a wonderful person. It's like, well, but she was a rich person who had good taste. So I guess
I understand again the reaction in this, but also can we look at this maybe in another way, which is that could we say maybe being very wealthy, fabulously wealthy, buying stuff up doesn't get good press more widely and ironically, because it seems to also, on the other hand, garner enormous admiration. But what I would say is that surely buying art and making it then public is doing an enormous service to the cultural capital of any place and of any people that claims to be part of any culture.
That is the argument I was going to go towards. That's the argument a lot of people make. And I don't know. I just thought it might be something interesting to dig into. By the way, to me, does Mars, if you look at him for a second, could you see him in your brain as sitting in a wheelchair with the shield as the wheel next to the wheelchair?
Yes, I could. Yeah.
Is it funny the things your brain does?
Also, I mean, we could play like match them in, because we could go to the National Gallery and we could find exactly the same Venus in another Rubens painting.
Right. It's like all the curly haired guy in the Caravaggio paintings, right?
Yeah, there's a kind of a currency to particular maybe models, I suppose. Anyway, thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Sandi.
And we shall indeed dig in to philanthropy or not, through buying and making public great art. That would be a fantastic and very interesting
I
topic.
think it could be a fun show.
Mhm.
Till
Bye.
next time. Bye.